Hello, welcome to Queer Cinema Catchup, the mini-series where we discuss Severance, and today we're talking about Severance Season 2, Episode 4?
Called Woe's Hollow.
What?
And it was pretty good, it was pretty crazy.
It was super crazy. I was very moved, so moved I've watched the ending about 3 times. Mm-hmm. What would be a fast recap?
I mean, I think you said it best. This felt very much like a Lost episode.
I did.
In terms of the TV show Lost, one of Allison's favorite TV shows in existence. Maybe your favorite?
It's the show that sparked my love for television.
Okay, that's pretty important. It's just the...
I was about to go off on a long explanation, so I think you were right to interject. What about it was very Lost-like, if you had to say?
The Innies are outdoors.
Well, yes.
And they are kind of going on they are on a retreat with Milchek.
A walkabout, if you will.
They just appear there, though. It's very alarming at first. We start out with Irv is on the ice. I love how you tell me to do these fast descriptions, and I immediately just let me describe the entire plot of the episode. How do I summarize this? I think it's just the Innie gang goes on a work retreat outside for the first time.
Without any warning.
Without any warning.
They wake up in a wilderness, cold lake type area in stunning winter wear.
And at first, the group is by themselves traveling to get to a certain point.
To Woe's Hollow, which apparently is the site of some Kier lore. Mm-hmm. Apparently
and as you know,
Kier had a strange...
We serve Kier, you child. Allison Etsy purchase.
Very important household item over here. Kier had a secret, or not necessarily a secret, but a twin brother that is not part of the official or sanctioned Kier lore, but more of a so sacred it can't be talked about until you get to go on this special retreat. Mm-hmm. Which, by the way, I don't know if you noticed, the acronym for the retreat was outdoor something ORT. It was an anagram for robot.
For robot.
Yeah.
Wow.
What does it mean? I don't know. There were weird clones of our clones or doubles or machines, who knows, of our Innies, following them, pointing them in the right direction.
Which I kind of just accepted.
I know.
But why?
I don't know.
That means it's a fantasy? I don't know.
It's unclear.
But anyway, they meet up with Milchek.
Yeah.
And then Milchek's walking them through these sites of Kier, kind of expanding on the lore in this episode.
In a way that was so strange.
Because they've been withholding so much, and then they're just here, let's go for it. It was really fun.
Strange, makes you want to laugh and gives you the creeps.
Yeah. And then the gang eventually goes to a campfire where they're promising to have marshmallows. And for the first time, it seems like Helly is acting like herself. She laughs, because earlier on there was a line where...
They're reading from this book that they found about Kier and his brother, and it's full of very fancy language, and the particular language, it sounds very sophisticated, but it's actually just saying that he jerked off in front of his brother.
In the forest.
And then he ends up dying. I guess just for context, he ends up dying. He wants to stay in the woods forever as a poor person with his brother, and Kier's
twin brother.
Dieter. His name is Dieter. And then Kier's no, we gotta go back to Dad. And then Kier's brother Dieter turns into a tree and dies.
And Kier hides under a waterfall.
And meets Woe.
Is that the woman?
Yeah. Who we'll talk about in a little bit.
They go to the campsite. They're about to have marshmallows.
Shit. The severed world is calling me.
He's calling you?
I think it's okay. We can keep going. Okay. So, the long story short, Helly's acting like her normal self, but in reality it's making Irv more and more suspicious. He tries to talk to Adam about this. Adam's what's his name? Mark S. And Mark's what the heck? You're being crazy. Even Dylan's acting like he's crazy. And then you think it's going to be... I personally thought the point of this mission was to actually fracture the group, and that's why they brought them all out there, to break their bonds, but it ends up making them stronger than ever, because they get into a big fight where Helly says very cruel things to Irv. He storms off, has a dream, and realizes that Helly is Helena Egan, and comes back and confronts her.
Is it Helena or Helena?
It's Helena.
Okay.
I've been saying it wrong this whole time. And begins to waterboard her near the waterfall, screaming at Milchek to turn her back. She's an Egan, she's naughty, she's been naughty the whole time. And then Helena goes, he goes, turn her back, Seth. And Helena goes, yes, do it, Seth. And you're oh shit, this theory was right. And then she turns back while in the water, comes out, And then Irv gets fired, which basically means he's going to be dead as an Innie.
You did skip
and
Mark
very
and
important plot point.
Helena have sex.
But he thinks it's Helly, so it's all very complicated.
And while they're having sex, Mark sees his wife, his outie wife.
Yes, which probably is the after effects of the reintegration. Oh, that's calling me. We're going to do it again after, I think.
I literally don't have time.
We're going to have to come back with more later.
Next week.
We didn't talk about anything!
Why don't you do a separate blog post?
Why don't you just let me do it after and I can tack it on?
Okay.
Okay. Hello, Joe. Have to go be an outie. So it's just me for this Queer Cinema Catchup mini-series take on Severance Season 2, Episode 4, Woe's Hollow, Part 2. I just couldn't leave you hanging. I wanted you to hang in there, which coincidentally is what Irv says to Dylan at the conclusion of this episode. I saw some theorizing online that perhaps there might be a poster in the office with that phrase on and perhaps a message behind it, but that's for next week. To kind of take you through what Joe and I wanted to take you through. Basically, the big crux of this episode is that the Helena theorizing that's been going on for the last couple of weeks finally paid off in a brilliant conclusion. Irv's suspicion of her grows and grows and grows. It seems like Milchek and the Lumen has taken them on this trip to kind of fracture the group and create division, and that's what it seems like is going to happen. But instead, they emerge more united than ever because Irv is able to determine that Helly is really Helena, attempts to waterboard her. Seth is forced to drop I guess, it's kind of like the overtime contingency thing we saw last season, but they called it the Glasgow block, so that she becomes Helly once again. And then Irv is fired, and it's a very heroic moving sequence. Anyway, that was the main crux of it, is that Helly was in fact Helena this entire time, as many people have been theorizing. But other things that we wanted to bring up was there did seem to be very strong parallels to Lost, among other TV shows. I think famous Sopranos episode, we were saying how it reminded us of Yellow Jackets. But for Lost, what really got to me was the video recording explaining. Milchek came on this TV that was on the top of a mountain saying, oh, you're on this outdoor retreat type situation. And it really reminded me of a Dharma Initiative video for anyone who's a Lost fan. And yeah, the entire production design of this episode was really strong, from the costumes to the way nature looked. There were some trees that looked like hands, for example, evoking the story about Kier and his brother Dieter, and how Dieter turned into a tree as he was passing away. And just some thoughts that we had while watching it were that perhaps dreams and the subconscious are a way to pass messages between the Innie and the outie, the outside world and Lumen. And we think that because Irv was able to realize Helly was really Helena Egan after he has an unusual dream, and he's at work clicking through the numbers as he does. He sees Bert, he sees Woe, the strange little bride lady who kind of looks very ghostly, who I'll return to in a minute. And they look back at the numbers, they begin to move and shift, and they spell out Egan, or at least seem to, and then he wakes up and immediately runs to try and find Helly, and then confronts her and says, you're not who you say you are. And so it seems like reintegration and dreams might be a way to connect the Innie and the outie, and perhaps Irv's outie is aware of this and is more consciously attempting to direct Irv's behavior, or perhaps Irv himself has been reintegrated. We'll see if we can even find this out, because Irv, the Innie, has now technically passed away since he's been fired. But going back to his dream and the character of Woe, who is one of the four tempers of Kier, Joe and I were watching it, and I said something like, she looks very much like a bride. It's giving Miss Havisham vibes, which is a character from Charles Dickens' Great Expectations. And Miss Havisham is a character who was supposed to be married, but I believe her husband either decided not to go through with it or left her at the altar. And so for years, she has stayed in her mansion, dressed in her wedding garb, which is beginning to rot away as she herself is beginning to age, in a room of rotting food and wedding paraphernalia deteriorating. And she's got a little bit mad. And her plot is to hire a beautiful, or not hire, I'm sorry, that's kind of a little severance of me, adopt a young woman named Estella, and then she finds a poor, unsuspecting young man, Pip, from Great Expectations, and tries to get Pip to fall in love with Estella, knowing that she's raising Estella to break Pip's heart. Which kind of makes me think, like, I think in last season of Severance, one of the Egans was named Pip, and then there's this strange Miss Havisham character. If Helly is kind of infiltrating Lumen as Helena Egan, as having sex with Mark, maybe trying to have a baby. I don't really know what I'm trying to say, but it feels like there's a Great Expectations parallel there somewhere with a woman being designed to break a man's heart. In this case, the man would be Mark. I also saw online that Helly, the waterboarding scene, was very similar to the video about all the changes at Lumen that were brought about by the Innie's attempt at resistance. And it had Helly bopping for pineapples. It was a very similar motion. No idea what to make of that, but it's a very smart observation. And it made me question if this seems like a very triumphant moment for Irv and the Innies, even though it's tragic in a way. But I wonder if it was part of the plan. Like, are they one step ahead of the Innies? Hopefully not, but perhaps they are. What else did I want to tell you? Patricia moment of the week? No Patricia. What's going on? Is Patricia Arquette busy? Has she had some scheduling conflicts? I don't know, but Joe and I miss her, and we really hope that she's in the next episode or that she gets an entire episode to herself. I think Innie of the week has to be Irv. What a hero, what a stunning ending. The acting was incredible when Seth is telling him to stand, Mr. Milchick is telling him to stand and walk into the forest. He has this moment where he walks and stands in front of Mr. Milchick and stares him in the eyes and kind of smiles at him in this sneering, triumphant way. And it was just very excellent acting, and it made me feel so proud of Irv, and I hope it's not the last we see of his Innie. I also think it's playing with expectations. His character of the bury your gaze trope, which is a trope where, because of the Hays Code and the rules surrounding how you could represent queer people in media, there was a longstanding trope where you could have a queer person in media, but they'd have to meet a tragic fate because you couldn't be seen celebrating that quote-unquote lifestyle. And then over time, even when the Hays Code went away, you know, we always look to our tropes, we always bring them back. That persisted, so often gay people will die on screen or their partners will die very tragically. And not that death and queer storylines can't coexist. We want to see every kind of story, but it's a little bit tiresome and disheartening when that happens every single time, especially because we want to see queer people living lives and affecting change and doing things in stories that all kinds of characters get to do. And so with Irv, throughout this episode, there's a little bit of fear for his life because he's out in the wilderness in the cold. He falls asleep. There was a question in my mind, is he going to freeze to death? Is this going to be a bury your gaze trope? Then he's waking up in a dream. He's seeing Bert, the great love of his life. Again, sparking my fear that perhaps he's passing away and he's seeing Bert. But instead, it's this hero arc where he pretty much saves the day. He saves Helly from never coming into consciousness again. He raises the awareness of Mark and Dylan about what's really going on, how Lumen is still trying to trick them, how Helena specifically has been trying to trick them. And then he gets to walk off in this almost soldier-like moment of glory. And yes, technically he dies because he's been fired, and once your consciousness ceases to be an Innie and ceases coming to work, you no longer exist. But it's not so straightforward as the gay person dies ending. It's much richer, and I think it's specifically trying to speak to that trope. I don't have fully formed thoughts yet on what that might mean, kind of from an analytical perspective, but it's definitely something I want to look at more. All right, and then Outie of the week. I'm going to go with Helena. I feel like if Joe was here, he'd be really mad because Helena was pretty terrible in this episode. She basically decides to have sex with Mark, pretending she's Helly and not being honest about who she was. But I just think the psychology of the character is really interesting. Yes, she's doing something nefarious, and she seems to be on the side of Lumen, but there does seem to be some shame and regret there. She says to Mark, I was ashamed of who I was up there. And Mark says very sweetly, I don't care who you are up there, I care who you are when you're with me, which is a very beautiful, intimate moment. But we come to find out that she's lying in that moment, and yet it felt psychologically true. So I just feel like she's a very complicated character, and specifically, I mean Helena, and I'm curious to know more about her as the weeks continue. All right, those are all my really important thoughts that I was so devastated I didn't get to share before we had to sign off earlier. Having come to the end of them, I don't know how valuable they really were, but I hope you enjoyed them. And we'll see you next week for Queer Cinema Catch-Up's mini-series on Severance Season 2 for episode number 5. All right, bye, guys.